Hi class, I wanted to provide a PowerPoint before you turned in your research paper to go over one more time the expectations for the paper. So let's do that. These are the minimum requirements for the research paper, meaning if you don't meet these minimum requirements, you will not do well on this paper. And remember, this paper is 25% of your final grade, so it's the most important thing that you've turned in all semester. Your paper needs to be a minimum of 1,000 words, and that's not including your citation. So the actual content of your paper needs to be a minimum of 1,000 words. I've capped the max at 1,200. If you go a little over that, that's fine. If you are under word count, you will lose points. So meet that minimum word count. You must use at least 5 sources. You can use more if you want, but you cannot use less. Those 5 sources can be 3 from your annotated bib and the timed writing number 3 source, and then an additional source. But you must have 5 sources. You must include a thesis statement, okay? So the end of your introductory paragraph needs to have a thesis statement that answers your research question. You must include 3 to 5 quotations from your sources, and those quotes must be cited. You must include cited research in each paragraph. So in your intro, in your body paragraphs, and in your conclusion, you need to have cited research. That can be either through the form of direct quotes or through paraphrasing, but either way, the research needs to be cited. Your paper needs to be at least 5 paragraphs, an intro, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. As a reminder, this is not your annotated bibliography. It's the same topic and you can use the same sources, but you shouldn't just be copying and pasting the content from your annotated bibliography into your research paper. They're different assignments. All right, so double check your MLA format before you turn in your paper. Remember that you should have a header that has your last name and the page number. The paper should be double spaced, Times New Roman 12-point font. You should be indenting each new paragraph. You should be using 1-inch margins. You should have that heading with your first name and last name, my name, the course, and the date. And then you should also be giving me a title that's centered on your front page. Okay. So your introductory paragraph needs to do a few things. You should be including an introduction strategy. Those are the strategies we talked about way back at the beginning of the semester that are used to grab your reader's attention. You should be ending your introduction with a thesis statement, and that thesis statement should not be your research question. It should be the answer to your research question. It should be presenting solutions. So if, for example, your research question was, how can students manage mental health issues? A thesis for that might be something like students can manage mental health issues through meditation, time management, and physical activity. So your thesis statement, which should be the last sentence in your introduction, should answer your research question. You also want to make sure in your intro that you're establishing why we care about this topic in general, and that's probably where your research will come in. Maybe you'll be giving us some statistics, maybe you'll be talking about effects or causes, but you want to make sure that we care about the topic in the first place. And then just as a reminder, I know I'm repeating myself, but that's necessary sometimes. The introduction needs to include research in the form of cited sources. You can either be using those signal phrases to set up your citations where you say something like, according to Bridget Bell, writing for the New York Times, or if you don't use that signal phrase, then you need the in-text citation to direct me to the source. Your body paragraphs, I'm saying body paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 here, assuming that you're going to have 3 body paragraphs. If you have more body paragraphs, so maybe you have 4 solutions instead, then this would be applicable to all 4. But you need a minimum of 3 body paragraphs. So your body paragraphs should not be just divided up by source, source, source. They should be divided up by solutions, and then your research should back up those solutions. So you should be giving me a topic sentence that relates to your thesis and that clearly suggests a solution. So if we're going back to the previous thesis that I provided about mental health issues, one example topic sentence might be, students can manage mental health issues through meditation. Then each paragraph needs to include relevant cited research. And again, that research needs to be introduced with either a signal phrase, it needs to include an in-text citation if you don't have a signal phrase, and that research needs to appear on your works cited page at the end of the paper. If you are using quotes, which remember, you're required to use at least 3 to 5 quotes throughout the paper, You want to make sure that you're sandwiching those quotes. So thinking back to that quotation sandwich we talked about, where you give the top piece of bread where you set up the quote, you give the quote itself, and then you give that important explanation of the quote's relevance. You should not be ending a paragraph with a quote, because then you're missing the top piece of bread, okay? Double check that you have your quotation marks where you need them. So when I say, are there any places you think quotation marks might be missing? Double check that if you've started a quote, that you also show where the quote ends. Go look at your Turnitin report. I gave you a place in Sakai where you can submit your paper to get your Turnitin report. Use that as a tool to double check for plagiarism. Remember that we're using meta-commentary again in this paper, so you should be ending your body paragraphs with that meta-commentary. Check for grammar, check for spelling issues. Have you used you? You should not be using you in this paper. Remember that if you hold down the control key on your keyboard, CTRL, and the letter F as in fish, you can then search for the word you in your paper. It should highlight for you everywhere you have you so that you can go back and correct that. Remember too that you don't want to overly rely on quotes. So when I say, does the body paragraph include an explanation in the writer's own words of the solution, you need to be using your voice too. You should not just be stringing together quote after quote from research. Okay, so that covers the meat of your paper, body paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. That brings us to your conclusion. So remember that in your conclusion, you're going to do two things. You're going to reiterate your main points without exact repetition. So that means you're reminding me of the solutions that you've just discussed. And then this is where the argument comes in. I want you in your conclusion to argue for what you see as the best solution to your research question, and to back that up with research, with cited research. So your conclusion also contains research. Now, some of you might say, well, my problem is complex and the best solution would be to use all three. I want you to pick one. I want you to pick one based on what you see as most feasible. So maybe the solution you pick is the most feasible because it's the most accessible to everybody, or maybe it makes the most financial sense. Whatever your reasoning, pick one and argue for that as the best solution. For your works cited page, is it an ABC order? Remember that your citation should be an ABC order based on the first word in the citation. You should be using those hanging indents. You should be removing that hyperlink format. So if you have blue underlined font in your works cited page right now, you need to change that to black and get rid of the underline. Remember how the dates are formatted in MLA. You have the date first, the numerical value, then you have your month, and all your months are abbreviated with the exception of June, July, and May, and then you have your year. Remember that you want to make the font all the same, and that's still that Times New Roman 12-point font double spaced. You want to check your titles to make sure they're capitalized correctly. If you go to page 131 in Little Seagull, there's a breakdown for you of how MLA handles capitalization. For your URLs, you do not need that leading https://. You can delete that. If you've used online sources, which the vast majority of you have, do you end your citations with an access date? Are there at least 5 sources? You need at least 5 sources. And those 5 sources should be mentioned at least once in your actual paper. Any source that's on your works cited page needs to be mentioned in your paper, and any source that's in your paper needs to appear on your works cited page. Double check where you have quotation marks and italics. Quotation marks go around titles of shorter pieces, so like article titles. Italics are used for those larger containers, so like the actual title of the full newspaper, of the full magazine, of the full journal, of the database. And then again, I mentioned this, but each citation needs to be referenced clearly at least once in the paper. Okay, if you have any questions at all, please email me so I can clarify anything for you. Thanks.